welcome to my channel. Today's video is going to be my review on the first two books in the Twisted series by Ana Huang. So if you haven't heard of these books or this author, this is a series of, it's going to be a total of 4 books, but only 2 of them are out so far. So the first book in the series is Twisted Love, and then the second book in the series is Twisted Games. So I read both of these books recently, so I'll just start off by saying that I absolutely loved them. So I'm just going to kind of explain what they're about and obviously give my thoughts on each of them. So I'm going to start off with Twisted Love, of course. So this book does have a couple different tropes. It has the grumpy sunshine trope, the brother's best friend trope, and then the I hate everyone but you trope. And it basically follows Ava and Alex. And so Ava has an older brother named Josh, and he is extremely protective of Ava, and they actually live next door to each other. She is a college student, and then her brother, I believe, is in medical school. And so he's leaving for the next year to go and do like this volunteer program in another country. So he asks his best friend Alex to keep an eye on Ava while he's gone, because she's young, he thinks she's like a little bit naive, and she's very like trusting of people. So he just wants to make sure that she stays out of trouble, so he just kind of asks Alex to watch over her, and Alex takes that job very seriously. He ends up moving into Josh's house and living right next door to Ava, and basically he just keeps an eye on her, makes sure nothing happens to her. But he is a very cold person. They didn't really have like any sort of relationship before that. He is very closed off, they don't really talk much, but basically her friends come up with this idea for her to kind of like evoke some emotions out of him. So she kind of starts on this like little plan to like make him feel these different emotions like sadness, happiness, disgust, fear, and jealousy. And it kind of doesn't really work out. He's still just a very like closed off person, doesn't really show any emotions. But then one night they end up at the same event, and that is the first time that he finally shows an emotion, and it is jealousy. And so basically they start to fall for each other. There is quite a bit of drama that leads up to that point, but then they eventually do get into a relationship with each other. However, both of them have very kind of dark pasts, especially Alex, and he, because of his past, is a very just kind of like dark person and very like morally gray. So I do want to say with this book, definitely check trigger warnings. It is kind of a dark romance, and Alex is a very toxic character. You're not gonna necessarily like love him because he's just very like morally gray. He does a lot of things that really aren't that great. But with all of that, I still really loved this book. I thought it was so good. I literally could not put it down. The day that I started reading it, I stayed up until 5 a.m. that night reading this book, and that's something I pretty much never do. I'll like stay up sometimes to read a book, but I pretty much can never stay up past like 2 or 3 reading because I just get so tired. But this one, I literally, like, I had to stop myself and tell myself to go to sleep and just finish it in the morning, but I wanted to finish it all in one sitting. It was just that good. Like, I literally had to make myself close the book and go to bed. And it just had a very interesting storyline that keeps you reading, because you obviously don't really know too much about their past, and you kind of start to learn more about them, and you kind of learn what happened, and both of them have like their own stories. But this was just one of those books that keeps you like wanting to know more, and I just found the storyline to be super interesting. I really liked the characters too. Obviously with Alex, I said he's a very like morally gray character, and he's pretty toxic too, and it was like one of those things where I like loved him and hated him at the same time. And I also really loved Ava and like her personality. This book, like I said, is Grumpy Sunshine, and I feel like these characters, like of all the Grumpy Sunshine books I've read, these 2 characters like actually quite literally fit the definition of Grumpy Sunshine. And one of the things I really loved about this book was Alex's nickname for Ava. He would call her Sunshine, and I just thought it was so cute. I am kind of picky about like the little like pet names or nicknames sometimes in books, and when I first heard that he called her Sunshine, I wasn't sure like how I was gonna feel about that, but once I started reading it, it just like made perfect sense, and I just thought it was the cutest thing. But something else I really loved about this book was the character development for both Ava and Alex. But Ava's growth specifically is something I just really loved. I feel like she changed so much throughout the book, and she really just like gained a ton of confidence and had like a really high self-esteem by the end, and I just really loved that. And I just really loved like their relationship too. This book is a dual POV, both of these are, which I really love, like getting to see obviously both sides of it from them. But this book, obviously we're reading all about like their love story, their relationship, and kind of seeing inside of that. And something I realized is that they do make an appearance in the second book because these are interconnected standalones. And so while I was reading the second book, like when they make their appearance in that, I realized that if I hadn't read this book first, I like wouldn't have liked them. I would have seen like the way Alex acts like in that book, because he's like a very like cold person in that book, and I just like wouldn't have liked them, and I wouldn't have understood their relationship at all. So I definitely think you should read this book before reading the second one, because you do get to see like their relationship and like the way that they work together, and it really does follow that whole like I hate everyone but you trope, because he literally is so cold and like mean to everyone, but he's just so like different around her. But like I've said already a ton of times, I really loved this book. It was a little bit different than what I normally read, obviously, because it was kind of a very dark story at times, but I did rate it 4.5 stars. So now I'm going to talk about book 2, which is Twisted Games, and this book follows one of Ava's best friends. Her name is Bridget, and she is a princess of like a European country, and so this book is like a princess bodyguard romance. It's also obviously like a forbidden love romance, because, you know, she's not supposed to be with her bodyguard, and it's a little bit enemies to lovers. They don't really get along in the beginning, but eventually they do fall for each other, and it's also an age gap book. There is a 10-year age gap between the two main characters. And so with book 2, I would say that this one's even better than the first one, which I really didn't expect that at all, but I loved this one even more. And what I loved about it is it was basically like the Princess Diaries 2, but like way more grown up and like with spice. And so like I said, it follows Bridget and her bodyguard Reese. And so basically Bridget, she gets this new bodyguard, and they don't really get along at first because he obviously takes his job very seriously. He doesn't really let her do things, and so they butt heads a lot in the beginning. But this story does take place like over 4 years, so like for the first few months they just really don't get along at all, and then at one point there's kind of like this turning point in their relationship where they start to like bond a little bit and understand each other a little bit better. However, she eventually finds out that her brother, who was next in line for the throne, has decided to step down because he wants to marry his girlfriend, and his girlfriend is a commoner, so he can't be king if he marries her. So that leaves Bridget next in line, and now she has to become the queen, which is something she never thought she was gonna have to do, because obviously with her brother being next in line, if he ever had kids, they would come after that. So she never like planned on taking the place as the queen, and now that's what she's gonna have to do. And so the story kind of obviously goes from there. Eventually she does start to fall for Reese, and he starts to fall for her too, but obviously with her becoming the queen, there is like that whole forbidden aspect between them. And this book does overlap with the first book a little bit. Like the first part of this book does overlap with things that happen in the first book, so it would make most sense obviously to read the first book first, because otherwise some stuff that happens in this one like isn't going to make too much sense. But it's not like absolutely necessary, but I would still recommend reading them in order. I will say that this book was not nearly as dark as the first one. It was definitely like a little bit more lighthearted, but definitely still check trigger warnings with it. And so I wasn't sure about the whole like princess bodyguard trope at first. I would probably normally not read books like that, but obviously after I read Twisted Love and loved it so much, I knew I wanted to read this one immediately, and then like I said, I loved it even more. I also just really loved these characters, especially Reese. I just absolutely loved him. Like with Alex in the first book, it was a little bit iffy because like I said, he's very morally gray, but like with Reese there was like no question, I just liked him, and he was just a great character. But I also really loved Bridget. I feel like a big part of why I loved this book even more than the first one is because I felt like I connected a little bit more to these characters than I did with Alex and Ava, and I also just like felt bad for them and like what they went through, like the point where I like cried while I was reading this book. And again, something I really loved was the character development. Just like in the first one, this one had a ton of character development too, especially with Bridget. I love like how she changes so much throughout the book, and with her just becoming like a much stronger character by the end. I really loved like this love story. I was so happy with it. This is probably like one of my favorite love stories that I've read, and I just didn't want it to end. It was so sweet, and I just fell in love with this whole story. So with both of these books, I feel like there's a lot more to the plot, especially with the first one. I feel like I kept it really vague, but there's definitely a lot more to it than that. And these books I think just have like interesting storylines that keep you wanting to read it. As far as like the age rating for these books, they are definitely 18 plus. There is like a lot of spice in these books, but honestly, based on like what I had heard and seen about these books, because I do follow Ana Huang on TikTok, and she does post a lot like about her books and what they're about and like kind of the content they contain. So I was worried about how I'd feel about there being so much spice in these books, but honestly it didn't bother me as much as I was expecting, because I think part of me was expecting this book to be like all spice and like no plot, but both of these books did have a lot of like the plot in them that was actually like a good and interesting plot. So those are all of my thoughts on these books. I have loved this series so far. The next 2 books are not out yet. I know the next one comes out I think in January, and then the 4th one comes out like in the spring, and I know the next one I believe is called Twisted Hate, and it follows Josh, Ava's brother, and then one of Ava's best friends, and then the last book follows another one of Ava's best friends. So I'm so excited to read those. But like I said, these two books were really great. They're a great start to this series and I would highly recommend them. But that's pretty much it for this video. Please subscribe if you liked it and want to see more, and thank you so much for watching.